I had to have one last look at his ex-wife, who was on her deathbed, according to my soon-to-be ex-husband Ethan, 2 years ago. She had had cancer for a very long period, and it had progressed greatly. I couldn't stop her from wanting to visit him. Ultimately, the pair had been acquainted from their early years. They were close throughout college and attended the same schools. A few years after graduation, they tied the knot, but after 7 years of marriage, they made the decision to divorce. Ethan refused to go to Australia so that his ex-wife Sophie might pursue her profession there. Ethan didn't want to move back here, even if Sophie had received a fantastic offer from Australia that would have paid considerably more. After much debate amongst them, she ultimately made the decision to relocate alone to Australia. They attempted long-distance dating, but regrettably it didn't work out, and they separated. They continued to communicate amicably, though. Through a handful of acquaintances, Ethan and I were introduced 5 years after his divorce. After we began dating for nearly 3 years, he proposed to me. Although, in retrospect, I believe it was my first error, I did say yes. He called Sophie his oldest friend in the world, and they remained very close even then. I was apprehensive about their connection at first, but Ethan had been so open with me, so I quickly understood that they were simply friends. Sophie was kind, and even came to our wedding, so I didn't feel intimidated by her involvement in his life. We were married for almost a year when I became pregnant. Though we hadn't been attempting, we were content. Sophie informed us at the same time that she had been diagnosed with brain cancer, which had progressed to the 3rd stage. I made an effort to be all right with Ethan, attempting to comfort her over the phone for hours at a time. Ethan had never given me any cause to assume that he was cheating, even after all these years of getting to know each other. That's why I said yes when he wanted to visit Sophie one final time before she died away. I didn't want to appear to be the antagonist. I felt it would be unfair to deny him the opportunity to say farewell while Sophie was dying. I was 6 months pregnant at the time. Ethan said he will be back in a few weeks. That was all right with me, and I made my parents move in with me while he was away. For the first few weeks, I chatted with Ethan every day. Sophie and I had a few conversations, and it was obvious that she was not feeling well. However, after a few weeks, Ethan informed me that Sophie's condition had difficulties, and he would need to stay longer. This kept happening a few more times, but I was patient and accepted it. My patience became weaker each time. I told him I couldn't wait any longer after nearly 2 months had gone. I threatened to have the baby by myself, and made it plain that I was sick of sacrificing everything for his friend who was dying. Ethan informed me that he would not come back until Sophie was gone, and that was his final choice, rather than coming back. I was enraged. We had an argument, and even though I felt awful afterwards, I yelled at him that I would have the kid by myself. I still didn't give him a call back. I was too proud to let it. Especially when I was pregnant, I didn't want to be the sort of woman who begged her husband to return. When my due date drew near, I remained silent to him. He was unyielding despite my parents' and in-laws' best efforts to reason with him. Even they stopped talking to him after a few arguments and concentrated on supporting me during my pregnancy. We had completely ceased talking about Ethan. I advised everyone not to bother notifying Ethan when I went into labor. I made the decision after giving birth to not talk to him again until he returned, and even then, only to say goodbye. I refused to file for divorce when my parents asked whether I wanted to. I wasn't prepared for the bother at the moment. It dawned on me in the next months that I could handle this on my own. Ethan's absence strengthened my conviction that I didn't need him in my life. I had to return to work, so my parents and in-laws were a big assistance. I was too busy to think about Ethan for several months after my kid was born. But as everything calmed down, I began to consider getting a divorce once more. I chose to hold off until he got back. Though he was no longer in contact with some of his relatives and friends, he had been cut off completely by both of our parents. I knew he knew I'd given birth previously, but he hadn't bothered to get in touch. My in-laws informed me a few weeks ago that they had heard from a few of Ethan's pals that he was returning. That meant Sophie was gone from our lives, which was a little sad, but I was more worried about Ethan coming back. I looked for divorce attorneys as soon as I received the news. After I settled on one, I told him about my circumstances and asked him to submit the necessary documents so that I would be prepared for Ethan's eventual return. To be quite honest, I had been looking forward to this day for a very long time. A few days ago, I finally had the opportunity to experience it when Ethan was outside when the doorbell rang in the morning. He looked really unusual and carried a lot of luggage, but that wasn't what worried me. Without saying anything, I allowed him inside when I opened the door for him, and he remained silent as well. After entering, he requested to see his son. I took the necessary action and carried our son into the living room. My kid was quite shy and would not even approach Ethan. Instead, he stayed behind me because he had never seen this guy before. Ethan made a great effort to convince my kid to approach, but he refused. He had to go back to his room eventually so he could play with his grandparents. Though it was his own mistake, I could tell Ethan was sad that his own son did not know him. I took the decision to pull out the divorce documents and ask him to sign them in order to dissolve our union after he remained silent for a few minutes. After giving it some thought, he informed me he was not signing anything because he was not wanting to dissolve our marriage, which appeared to shock him considerably. We'd been living apart for the last year and a half, so I found it hilarious. Whether he wanted to dissolve the marriage or not didn't matter. If I went to court, I had a good chance of winning my case. I was going to stop waiting now that I had waited for 2 years. I told him that since our last argument a year and a half ago, he had not even attempted to contact me. We had already been officially divorced for a very long period, one could claim. Furthermore, he had never inquired about my well-being, much alone checked on me personally, after I gave birth, or even talked to me about our baby. Although I was fortunate to have my parents and in-laws at my side, his presence was as crucial. He was absent when I most needed him. If he so desired, he could challenge the divorce, but I was certain that it would be useless. I informed him that I would be requesting full custody of our son for the time being. He would be allowed visitation privileges, and perhaps in the future, we might rework the custody agreement to allow him to see our kid for a brief period of time, mostly for the benefit of my son. But this was the best I could accomplish for the time being. He had seen his kid, and I had done what I had been waiting to do, so I asked him to go. We have nothing to talk about anymore. Instead of shouting at me or storming off, as I had expected, he just broke down on the couch. I was very taken aback by it, as I did not anticipate it. In only a few moments, he was crying like a little child. I made the decision to call his parents and let them know what was going on, since I didn't know what else to do. A man sobbing like that didn't seem like the right time to contact the police. It was clear he was really grieving, even if he was unable to express it. His parents arrived in a matter of minutes and had to physically pull him out of the place as he was unable to even stand up for himself. He was sobbing so much. I made the decision to talk to a few of his acquaintances after he passed away in order to learn more details about the circumstance. After chatting to them, I learned that he had reportedly been discussing returning for a few months. He had called me on many occasions to try to patch things up, but he refrained from doing so because he was afraid I would become enraged and start fighting with him again. They informed me that since I hadn't blocked any of them, he had kept himself informed through them. Since he departed, he had missed us every day, but he was unable to leave Sophie because her condition was getting worse. She persisted in battling, and according to her physicians, the therapy was having an effect on her. There was nothing he wanted to risk when he got there. He hadn't disclosed it to me because I wouldn't feel comfortable knowing that Sophie still had feelings for him. I'm really perplexed now. Not even close to it understand how to react to anything. To be honest, I'm simply numb. Ada for having to wait 2 years for my spouse to return just so I could personally serve him with divorce papers? Edit. I've had a lot of inquiries over my choice to hold off. I would not have been able to take care of my kid, go to work, and manage the divorce at the same time if I had filed for divorce earlier, which is why I chose to wait to give him the divorce papers in person. I believe I had stated in my initial article that being married to him was not causing me any harm. If I wasn't dating other guys or considering marriage to them, I didn't see the need of divorcing. No matter how long it took, I was more than happy to wait for him to return. Furthermore, considering child custody would have required further discussion if I had filed for divorce at that time. Not only would we need to split up all of our belongings, but we would also need to consider a custody plan. I am aware of how protracted these circumstances may grow. Besides, there were tax benefits to being married, so I continued putting it off because I didn't want to deal with the bother. What's more, at first I had been hoping that perhaps he might return sooner rather than later. I was still naive enough to think that if he got back, maybe we could sort things out, in spite of all that had happened. Naturally, I see now that it was never going to work. Many others wanted to know why. With all the things his buddies had lately told me, they had never talked to me. It was because they didn't want to speak out of turn, and since Ethan had clearly warned them not to say anything to me. The majority of them avoided getting entangled in any of this, because they truly didn't want to. Since they've known Ethan and Sophie for a lot longer than they've known me, I suppose I can't really hold them responsible for it. They clearly have allegiances to someone other than myself, so I guess it's fair enough. First update. Hello everyone. So a week or so ago, Ethan made his long-awaited comeback after 2 years, and when I gave him the divorce papers, he sobbed uncontrollably. After that, I talked to his friends and learned things that I had not known before, but I have come to the conclusion that nothing has changed. He ought to have talked to me, even though I understand that she needed him and was benefiting from the treatment while he was there. He ought to have explained to me that he was truly attempting to save Sophie's life by sticking with her. If he had been honest with me, maybe I wouldn't have left him, but he had only made things worse for himself. All of the falsehoods and the way he argued with me the previous time, never bothering to check in or reach out, simply kept repeating themselves in my mind. I'm not sure I will ever be able to bring myself to trust him again, or let go of what occurred, even if we decide to give our marriage another go and attempt to make it work. It was difficult for me to be apart from him for 2 years, especially after learning that he was living with his ex-wife. They used to date and had been together for a very long time, even if it's true that she was dying. I would have responded the same way if I had been in their shoes. Perhaps they would have gone much sooner, and wouldn't even have waited for him to return. Speaking of which, I've already drawn a lot of criticism for waiting those 2 years, but I've already given my justifications in the edit, and I have no desire to engage in the debate once again. To put it another way, I'm not even sure whether I love him, but I'm accused Ethan to being a single mother now. After the way he acted, all of my feelings for him vanished into thin air, and I'm definitely not to fault for any of it. That day he came back, I had sent him home with his parents because he had really lost it. I could see that his mental state was not good. I suppose I had overlooked the reality that, despite having given up on his own marriage and his opportunity to start a happy family, he had recently lost Sophie. It would undoubtedly be too much for anyone to handle. In his circumstances, therefore, I genuinely feel bad for him. However, I won't hold myself responsible for it. Ultimately, it was him who had placed himself in that predicament. To see how he was doing, I did stay in contact with his parents. They informed me that he was a recluse who only left his room for meals and lunch. I'm aware that he hasn't been doing well, but all I can do is offer my condolences. I still have the divorce decree here. All I have to do is get him to sign them, which I will do as soon as his parents let me know that he is feeling slightly better. I can't put this off indefinitely once again. I've already discussed custody of our son with my attorney, and I've begun drafting the necessary documents. Until our boy is mature enough to communicate with his father, I believe it is reasonable for me to desire sole custody of him. He has only known me as a parent thus far, and I intend to keep it that way until I'm certain Ethan can manage the responsibilities of fatherhood and won't try to snag it again. I've discussed it with both my in-laws and parents. They all believe that my application for full custody is the correct thing to do. I don't know if he will fight for his son's custody, but if he does, the odds won't be in his favor. Everyone, I believe, can attest to the fact that he is just not ready to be a parent at this time. Right now, It's best if my son is under my complete control. At the time, neither the divorce nor the custody are causing me any great concern. My in-laws will take care of the portion where they need to talk to their son about it, since I know they are on my side. I'm genuinely solely concerned about how I'm going to handle it emotionally. Ever since Ethan came back, I have felt so very tired and depleted. Sincerely, I thought that giving him the divorce papers would provide me closure and satisfaction, but that wasn't the case. The bitter taste that lingered in my mouth was probably caused by the fact that he just broke down entirely thereafter. Regardless of how they have acted or treated me, I don't want to be the sort of person that enjoys causing harm to other people. I really want this divorce to be finished, so I genuinely and truly hope that Ethan feels well soon. After waiting through this for 2 entire years, maybe ending it would help me feel better. If not, at least it will be finished. I'm grateful that my kid, as well as my parents and in-laws, will be there to support me till then. I'm confident I can overcome it. I've survived far worse and emerged stronger than before. It's simply that, like everyone else, I have trouble getting past this. Second update. So, 2 days ago, I finally heard from my in-laws. They informed me that Ethan was starting to feel a little better and that he intended to resume working. He had been working from home for the previous year or so. Since his employer didn't require him to be present in person, he could still work from home, but it seemed like he needed something to divert his attention. I assumed that he was doing better, and that it was time for us to talk to him again when they told me about it. Ethan was present when I went to see my in-laws this evening. He remained silent, appearing rather surprised to see me. I went up to him again with the documents and told him he needed to sign them this time. I couldn't wait for him to get well indefinitely, so we had to get a divorce. I understood that he was going through a really trying time, but he had to know that I had experienced far worse, and at least I was making the effort to see how he was doing. There was no one to take care of him. He remained silent for some minutes. When he did say something, it was only to apologize profusely for everything. He said that he ought to have informed me up front why he was remaining with Sophie in order to give her a better opportunity at life. He had made a mistake. He had not only lost Sophie, but his family as well. He began to cry once again, and even though I felt terrible for him, there was nothing I could do to support him. I merely held the papers in my hand and waited for him to take them and sign them. I felt it was a really poor legal decision that he signed the divorce petition without even trying to read it. He informed me he had no right to dispute anything because of what he had made me go through. He trusted me to be fair, no matter what parameters I came up with. And I suppose I had. We made about the same amount of money, so it wouldn't be fair if I demanded alimony from him. I was simply asking for what I was entitled to, nothing more, even in terms of child support. Equal distribution of assets and property had also occurred. However, the place I had been residing in was the one item I kept private in the petition. I've been living there for the past few years, but ideally we would have sold it and divided the proceeds. In addition, our son has accused Ethan to that location, therefore I did not want to move out. I have no desire to alter that. He is in agreement with the custody arrangement, which I also discussed with him. We'll renegotiate the terms in a few years, but for the time being, I have complete custody. Later on, I will have the opportunity to sign the papers, but everything is set in motion after speaking with my lawyer. I suppose I may now at last feel somewhat relieved. I truly do, and I'm excited to have more freedom in my life. Third update. Hello everyone. Well, it has been over a year after Ethan and I finalized our divorce. For the benefit of our son, we continued to communicate after the divorce. After locating an apartment a few blocks from our house, he moved out after living with his parents for a few months. He comes to see us often so he may get to know our son. They get along so well, and he appears to make our son happy, so I believe it's a wonderful thing. That is everything that important to me personally. At first, seeing him so frequently was incredibly tough for me, and it was odd for him as well, but we quickly got the hang of it. I'm also still in contact with my in-laws, or perhaps I should refer to them as my ex-in-laws, now that Ethan and I are no longer together. Anyway, my parents are still living with me, and they also come to see us rather regularly. Although I can very much handle my son alone now that he is almost 3 years old, I still value having my parents nearby. They seem to like living with us as well. I'm simply concentrating on my job and parenting my son at the moment. Romance is not something I have time for in my life. I'm not going to consider that right now, but maybe I may in the future. Given that he had returned and the arrangement with our son, many of my friends, and even some of the people here doubted that I would be able to avoid getting back together. I would have to visit him rather frequently, but thus far, there hasn't been any trouble, and I don't expect there will be any in the near future. I don't really feel the same way about him, and if I do, he's done a great job of hiding it. It's not my problem even if he does. No matter what, I'm not going to go back with him since I've already been through a lot. I wish to spare myself from that experience once more. I'm content with my life at the moment, and intend to